Okay, good afternoon. Welcome everybody to the Scrutiny Management Committee public hearing session with the Committee for Economic Development. And today we'll be focusing on items in the government work plan, which are the responsibility of the committee, together with more broad items in the committee's mandate. I'm Deputy Yvonne Burford, and with me on the panel today I have Deputy Simon Fairclough, Deputy John Dyke, Deputy Adrian Gabriel, and Mr Mark Huntington, who's the Principal Officer of the committee. Following this session, we will decide if any further action is needed, and in any case there will be a transcript appearing in due course on the Scrutiny website. Could everyone please be aware that this hearing is being live streamed? We'll take a short comfort break at around about 3:30 for 5 minutes. And so if I could just now hand over to the committee and ask you to introduce yourselves, please, perhaps starting with Deputy Mokes.
Good afternoon. My name is Nick Mokes.
I'm Neil Inder, President, Economic Development.
Deputy Sasha Kazantseva-Miller.
Okay, we're going to start off today with questions on air and sea links. I think that's quite topical. Deputy Inder, on the 17th of March, it was reported that services provided by Condor ferries were only guaranteed for the next 2 years until March 2025. It was pointed out this was despite the state's financial investment in the purchase of an additional traditional-style ferry for Condor. The article stated that talks were underway about services beyond 2025. However, there remained uncertainty about the future of Condor services. How close is Guernsey to having a legal operating agreement signed with Condor?
I think I mentioned this in, I think it was my last statement, and I was questioned on that at the moment. Some things are of a commercial sensitivity and of nature. I think I also mentioned in the statement back in March that the MOU for Jersey runs out in 2025. In an ideal situation, we wouldn't have overlapping MOUs like we have now. I also mentioned ramp licensing as well. What I can assure the committee that the island is in constant communication with Condor on this significant matter, and also with Jersey as well.
Okay, because of course we have an MOU, and they in fact have a legal agreement, don't they?
That is correct.
Yeah. So, I mean, because this negotiation really has been going on in various ways, certainly since the start of this political term. I know Scrutiny had discussions with the Policy and Resources Committee early on in the term. Indeed, when we were considering reviewing air and sea links, or sea links in particular, and apparently negotiations were at a stage then where that precluded us doing that. And here we are sort of 3 years on and we're still negotiating. Do you have any confidence that we are going to get to a beneficial agreement in time?
We've got, whether it's going to be I think everyone's is certainly on the Guernsey side, and I can't speak for Jersey. We are certainly negotiating in good faith. We know that we've got the ramp licences, which is a piece of legislation that would hopefully be part of that agreement. On the matter of the purchase of the boat, you'll understand that we were not, as members of the CCA, so we won't entirely understand the rationale for that. So it's quite difficult to connect our negotiations as members of economic development with the purchase of that boat, because I genuinely don't know why that boat was purchased. I could guess my way through it, but I'd rather not. But to answer your question, I know that our committee is acting in good faith, and in an ideal situation, any future agreement would effectively match Condor's desire. It sort out the overlaps as well, and we would get effectively a bilateral agreement. Whether that happens or not, right now, I wouldn't guarantee it entirely. But don't read into that, because it takes two to negotiate and two to agree.
Okay, and is the principal difficulty with Condor or with Jersey?
It's always, I know that we are acting in good faith, and I know our committee would, in an ideal situation, like to get a bilateral agreement between the two islands. And until we entirely know, until we get a point that there's ink on paper, we won't know the end result. From what I've seen so far, Jersey, and talking to Mr. Morell, my opposite in Jersey, by all accounts, they are equally acting in good faith. But I haven't personally had a meeting with them in the last 2 or 3 months on the matter, so that is all background. It might be helpful in this regard, because Deputy Constanza Miller or Deputy Monks haven't. It might be helpful for Mr. Wakeland, one of our officers, to fat out some of that in some way to give you a little bit more information, a bit more detailed information from actual negotiation board advice. I'm happy to hand over to him.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Deputy Inder. There's been a number of recent meetings that involve Deputy Morell and Jersey Ports, as well as the states of Jersey. It's also been with members of the Policy and Resources Committee, representatives of the ports, and officers as well. I think there is progress being made. I think Deputy Inder is right. What we're trying to do is find a way that puts all three parties in the same position. So at the moment, as you've rightly said, Deputy Burford, there's an operating agreement and an aligned MOU. I think the idea is that we can all get ourselves into the same place so that everybody's got an equal understanding and equal access to the services and the discussions that would be around that. Clearly, the main driver for the hopefully the operating agreement to be finalised is potentially around investment and investment in the future fleet as well. It's a really important part of the agreement, and I think that's where we're having the discussions at the moment.
So when you say investment in the future fleet, there's further investment beyond the purchase of the ferry that's already been bought?
Yeah, this would be about the commercial investment in the
Right.
fleet in order to deliver services, yes.
Thank you. And as you know, as time ticks away, do you think that the parties are going to be more inclined to try and bring something together as we approach the deadline of the end of the agreements?
Yeah, I think there's definitely been more of a, I guess as a deadline looms, it accelerates conversation, and it certainly feels like it's heading towards a place where there's going to be hopefully an agreement in principle. But clearly that's for political leads in the discussions and for Condor and its board to come to in due course.
Okay, thank you.
And Deputy Burford, if you don't mind, I noticed that you mentioned about the investment in the fleet. I think in any commercial contract, if we are going to give a commercial entity effectively soulless, to be perfectly frank with you, on our various routes, it doesn't necessarily mean we will be doing the investment. We need to be assured that they're investing in their own fleet.
Yes, indeed.
Okay. I hope that clarifies
Yes,
that. I
thank
might
you.
have heard something you didn't say, but I just thought I'd clarify.
Yeah, no, thank you for the clarification. In your March statement, you said the additional roll-on, roll-off ferry is to be welcomed to increase resilience, and it reflects the ability of Condor fleet, which is clearly beneficial to our community as a whole, and I look forward to learning more about Condor's plans for a new vessel and the positive impact I'm sure it will have on the schedules in due course. We read in the press of changes over the winter period. Is your committee content with the level of service provided to Guernsey by Condor Ferries in their recently released winter timetable?
Not overly, but we only found out at probably the same time as a committee as you did. We saw it on the front page of the press yesterday. I've spoken to the chief officer of the firm and have expressed my concern that us having I thought a very good working relationship, it would have been fairly reasonable for him to have spoken to us beforehand, because we have built, I thought, a reasonable relation. So it came as a surprise that was released. But as a consequence of that, I'll be meeting him next week. Having said that, I'm fairly sure what some of the arguments will be, and you have to accept it. When you've got a mixed fleet or any fleet, they certainly need to go into dry dock and need scheduled maintenance. That's a statement of fact. We know that the Islander came in as effectively a bare ship. We know that she's in dry dock at the moment. We know that there's a substantial amount of money being turned into the accommodation section itself for all the reasons mentioned. So that boat will be out of action, and it will come in November the 1st. But to answer your question about the scheduling, strangely enough, the scheduling for next year is actually earlier than normal, but it might not be the schedule that we want. But it sounds like Deputy Constanza Miller might also have a view on that, so I'll turn to her.
I think it's worth mentioning there's a couple of items there. So there's no liberation service to the UK in November, December, and that's driven by maintenance requirements. Obviously, boats need to be maintained. And the other fact is that St. Malo is closed in January and February, so there's a restriction to where you can obviously go to. So all the sailings will be via Cherbourg. So clearly there are also external factors that are beyond, obviously, Condor's and our influence that needs to be taken into account.
Okay,
And
thank
also,
you.
probably if I may add to that, even though there's a sort of initial reaction, what we do know is conventional ferries will go through the channel. It's almost certainly that even though we've got high-speed ferries, it will only go on the right day, and with its current limitations, and this is only my personal view, if I'm booking a flight in the winter booking a ferry in the winter months, I know what will go, and I know what I'm not sure will go.
In your view, how will the new ferry impact positively on the local economy? Do you think we will see benefits in the economy from it?
Well, it entirely depends. We do know that the Clipper and the Goodwill will eventually come to an end of life, and I think it's something I really need to pursue with Mr. Napton when I met him next week. We speak about the extra capacity. We can see that they're clearly investing in their fleet, which is actually good news. But I think what we do need to draw out, what is this really about? Are you actually adding something to your fleet, or is the real plan that in 2 years' time to sell off one of the boats and head towards conventional ferries? So I'd like to dig that out in that meeting we have next week and find out what really the long-term plan is.
So when you say one of the boats and then head towards conventional ferries, you mean the Liberation in that case?
Yeah, either of them, yeah.
Okay. Moving on to air links, what benefit has the air policy framework delivered this term?
I think it's well, I've got notes on the air policy framework here. You have to excuse me. Right. If there were three areas of in the route development plan, which is part of the air policy framework, was the development of an international hub, and the other one was to develop European destinations and UK regional. It probably needs to go back to the States again for another discussion on it. But in terms of the development of an international hub, you'll have heard also in one of my statements I mentioned a Paris link. Mm-hmm. Now, quite clearly, if we end up in Charles de Gaulle, which is subject to that being agreed by the states, because it's part of the government work plan. It comes out of our cash. It doesn't come out of our cash limit. It is part of the government work plan, and we've got something up to £500,000 over the life of the government work plan to look at an international destination. That would basically tick off the international hub, because quite clearly going into Paris is Charles de Gaulle is an international hub. It also ticks off priority 2, which is European destination. And in terms of UK regional, we've made some efforts. I think we gave some funding to, I think it was British Airways over the COVID period, to Edinburgh. We didn't think it was going to last, to be perfectly frank with you. We tried to encourage them again to carry on that route, but it didn't really happen. There wasn't much interest in it. So if there was a small F failing, the UK regional, in my view, hasn't necessarily gone as well as it might have done. But I do wonder, if we look at the map of how we're served, we are quite well served going to UK. There's no two ways about it. If you look at just the Aurigny map alone, I mean, we land practically everywhere, in my view.
Okay, then.
But again, I don't know if any other members have just on that. I don't want to dominate it, and I did say there are always nuances. I don't know if any other members have a particular view on that response.
No, I think that.
No, okay,
No,
right.
I was going to pick up on the Paris link, because I think that's very interesting. Obviously, I mean, we have had Paris links in the past in smaller aircraft. So you're seeking funding from the government work plan for the Paris link in particular. So in that case, you're going to have to wait for the vote in the States. But if it does go ahead, can you give any indication of the likely frequency and operation of these flights and the length of time for which the subsidy will be in effect?
I can. It's we've been approached, and it is still confidential. It was, as we were approaching, these things they gave us a general view of what's likely to happen. I can't tell you it's going to be 1 o'clock on a Thursday, coming back at 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon. But effectively, to answer your question, ma'am, it's a twice-weekly service starting from March 2024. There's a 3-year trial. It will land to Charles de Gaulle, as I explained earlier. But it is ultimately, it's a bid through the government work plan. If it doesn't get through the government work plan, it won't happen.
Okay, right, thank you. Deputy Gabriel.
Moving a little more closer to home,
Oh.
in a speech very early this term, you said Alderney is a great blank canvas, and I don't know why it's not got better than that, because something is not quite right up there, and I'd like to get to the bottom of it, and I will help Alderney. So, what has your committee been able to do to help Alderney in the last 3 years? Perhaps you could build on that statement.
We have engaged. We've been over to see Alderney, but we've got to accept that Alderney has its own form of government. If I was the king of Alderney, there's lots of things I would particularly like to do. We've tried to. There is, I think, one of our Alderney representatives is affecting my equivalent is the. I don't know if they're present over there. Are they the lead or the committee member for their equivalent, the economic development? Well, I've tried personally to encourage them on giving them areas to consider. But these are more about my personal ideas. But if you're asking from a policy point of view, our door is always open. There is no one on our committee that wouldn't assist Alderney. But we can't go in there with big boots and start shouting the odds. Alderney, to a degree, has got to come to us. And that statement I made back in the early days was effectively an open door for them to come and talk to us. But I haven't had any serious engagement from them to come to us. But we can't go there and ask them to do anything. And Deputy Councillor Miller has her hand up and she's got a response as well.
I want to add to that. Actually, some of our service areas, such as the digital greenhouse, do have ongoing relationship with the Alderney community, and because they provide events and also online resources, you can dial into events, etc. So I certainly know that there's active conversations with the Alderney community, including I believe Alderney Chamber, on the development of some of our enterprise initiatives, such as the Guernsey Enterprise Investment Scheme. Alderney political team also got in touch with us to learn more about, the potential applicability of the scheme. So I think there's different levels of conversations at officer level and kind of service level that also do happen with kind of the wider Alderney community.
But Deputy Councillor, I think you'll accept that. I think what you were driving at, Deputy Gabriel, is that there is no set piece, big idea, which I think could be developed, and it's great that we do transfer service and some of our skill sets there, but there's no set piece idea, and I still think Alderney has got an awful amount of going for it, but I'm not entirely sure they've got the right politicians up there. But that's possibly for another day. But Deputy Mokes also has a comment on that as well.
Just a very small thing. I understand that Guernsey Finance went up to Alderney very recently. Obviously, they promote the bailiwick in general, but they wanted to understand the nuances and perhaps the specifics of Alderney itself, just to see if they could help in any way. What that will lead to, I don't know, but I think it's a step in the right direction and a good thing to do.
Got a supplementary question.
Yeah, before we leave connectivity, could I make one supplementary regarding the Condor ferry? You mentioned that it's in that we're financed. You mentioned that it's in dry dock for upgrades and fitting out and blah blah blah. I take it that we're not on the hook for any more of that.
No, I don't.
Expense.
As far as you're aware, there's a figure of to answer your question.
All right, thank you. Well, that's how.
I haven't finished answering yet.
Sorry.
To just for the sake of clarification, because I'd hate to see this be on Facebook saying that we're paying for the maintenance, but as far as I understand it, there was initial investment which was published by Policy and Resources under the CCA, and as far as I know, that it was purchase only. I'm fairly sure, in fact I could almost guarantee without knowing, that we are not fitting out the new pet suites for Condor.
Right. And in connection with that purchase, I think the financing was 28 million. Are you concerned? I know it wasn't your committee that was involved in it. Are you concerned that we seem to have done that, but without any commitment as to what's in it for us in terms of connectivity?
Well, again, we're in the same position, and again, I'd be careful. I don't think we put up £28 million. I thought the vessel was of a certain amount. Did we? Does anyone remember? Wasn't there?
25 million. Sorry,
we put in 25.
It was a type of loan.
Okay. To be perfectly honest with you, I thought it was slightly less than that we put in ourselves. But again, it's a very difficult question to answer because strange. Well, I couldn't even answer it if I was on the CCA, but it's the reality is that there is no member of economic development on the CCA, which is quite perverse. And even if I didn't know what the deliberations were, I simply couldn't tell you, Deputy Dyke. It's as simple as that. But there was no communication whatsoever before the purchase or after the purchase or the investment in that boat.
All right, understood. Thank you.
Thank you. We've touched on Alderney, and I'd like to broaden that out to general economic development on Ireland, if I may. And Deputy Gazantsova-Miller has already mentioned some initiatives which we're going to come on to a little bit later in the hearing, hopefully. But first of all, in your update to the Assembly last March, you spoke about the development of the Human Capital Development Plan, and that it would be published in Q3 of this year. How is that progressing?
We've obviously missed Q3. We've gone through a process now where I think it's in better shape. It's about to come to the committee, but at this point I'm going to hand this over entirely to Deputy Gazantsova-Miller to answer that question.
Wonderful. Yes, so Skills Guernsey as an initiative has been going around for a good number of years, and when we started this political term with the Committee for Education, we've kind of pressed the reset button and said, listen, this is our chance to really give it a fresh start. And we were very quick to develop a framework, a human capital, what we call the Human Capital Development Framework, which has been approved by both committees last summer. So a framework of how we should be thinking about skills human capital development exists. We haven't published it, but it has been approved by both committees. One of the key items within that and within creating then the action plans to deliver against the human capital network was to set up a body that would help deliver on the plan. And we agreed that we wouldn't publish the plan until we've actually taken the step to develop the governance around the delivery model. And this is the part that has taken slightly longer than I think we hoped for. It's been a combination of officers caught up with other priority items. Ultimately, we're quite a small committee. But also because we wanted to look at some of the synergies with other mandates that we have within our committee, such as digital, because digital skills and digital skills development are a key component of any future skills human capital program. So we've taken a very conscious effort to say, listen, are there synergies to be explored? How are we going to do it? Because the cost efficiencies and value for money and doing really the best for our community are key. So we are very much there in terms of showcasing both committees the proposed governance models. Hopefully they will go to both committees literally imminently, and we will then and I think one thing to mention, obviously skills is also dependent on the government work plan, and that has significant dependencies on the government work plan. So ultimately we're a little bit in catch-22 territory as well.
Can I just add something? I'm not entirely sure what was there's an important part of this, Deputy Fairclough, is that I think the committee generally believes that the best place for certain services to be delivered would be effectively in the private sector. I'm not sure if Deputy Gazantsova-Miller mentioned it. She spoke about the framework, but priority on this is effectively going through a commissioning model where we would set up a board to deliver the framework and the skills strategy of what. Similarly, we're hoping that there would be one member from education on that board probably, and one member from economic development. So, really, we would be turning it into, if agreed by the states, getting the funding an arm's length body.
I mean, it's one thing, obviously, having the plan, and we look forward to seeing that. But how frequently does your committee meet to identify skills gaps in the workforce, and what's the process for addressing those, given that this is going to have to be a fluid plan, if you like?
I'm going to try and answer some of that, but I'm not directly answer the question of whether we sit as a committee to identify the skills gap. I think that really what you're asking is the reason we wanted it out into the private sector. Because it's not always the case that the committee is so busy doing different things, it doesn't have the time to sit down and decide, right, this week it's going to be Skills Week, next week it's going to be tourism, because stuff comes in, as you all see on your various committees, comes in left, right and centre. On top of that, from a project management point of view, it's very hard for us to identify individual project managers to do one single job. In the private sector, and I come from advertising and marketing, for way of explanation, you would have basically set up what looks like a brief or an idea and a policy. You would set that brief, you'd have a client. You would probably speak to the client again on the Wednesday, you would hammer out the brief to get it into some kind of shape. By Friday, you'd get final sign-off, and then there'd be a set of budgets and dates. It doesn't work like that in government. What we find, and I think it's to the frustration of committee members, the really active committee members, is that we think that we've got a lead on a certain project, but that we find that he or she might be co-opted somewhere else, or can't do the work, or might be away, or might be sick, or has left the building completely. And it isn't the way. And I don't know if it's culturally or from an organisation point of view, it's not that easy to deliver policies in the manner we're all used to doing. So I hope that sort of answers your question.
So is it fair to say that there are no staff dedicated to this area of work specifically?
Not unless the Deputy Councillor.
Can I just say, I think if you look, for example, specifically at digital entrepreneurship creativity skills within enterprise, those skills is the bread and butter of what Digital Greenhouse is doing on a BAU basis, on a constant basis. So they will all, in their capacity, will be looking and analysing the market, and then in partnership with industry and Agility and others, delivering programs to meet certain gaps in that market. In terms of kind of the wider question about skills and labour market forecasting, that's the kind of really capability we are very keen for this body to develop. So we've undertaken some work within the skills Guernsey group with PwC to look at the kind of metrics we should be looking, but establishing the data capability and data capture infrastructure for skills is one of the central pieces of what we see this agency basically developing. So I would say, to your question and to support what Deputy Inder was saying, it's not something we as a committee regularly look at, but it's something our service areas are looking with their niche capacities, but would be something quite central that the body is developing. And we've also done work with our central data and analysis team to understand what kind of data they have access to. Can we tag along to some of our systems we may have, such as, returns creator capturing certain amounts of data. So it's quite complex. How do you forecast? How do you forecast for skills? How do you analyse the gaps? And so this is the kind of really capability is central to developing as part of this body.
And Dr. Fairclough, I think.
Yeah, if I may, I was only trying to add a couple of points really to what Deputy Councillor has been saying as well, Deputy Fairclough. So in terms of staff time, there is, I think it's been mentioned, there is staff time, but it's used probably across different areas. But I think if the states and the committees agree the establishment of this approach, I think it will make it much more straightforward to really focus and deploy staff time to support this. And in terms of going back to your original question about the analysis of gaps in the workforce and in the economy, there's also, of course, the Population Employment Advisory Panel that was established. And of course, that's still there. The states agrees the different nominees and the different representatives for each of the economic sectors that it covers. And that provides advice on that both to committees. It does it with, I'm sure, with the Guernsey Institute as well, and around training and development bodies in the private sector. And also, of course, the Population Management Office, in order to think through some of the how permits might impact on the recruitment into those sectors as well as training. So there's quite a there's got sort of an ecosystem around all of this, and I think that what Deputy Inder and Deputy Councillor Miller have just described will help to pull that together and make it even more effective.
And just if you. Well, it's up to you, Deputy Fairclough. It's your
Did
question.
you want to come in on that?
Yeah, I also think that the work that Deputy Councillor Miller was talking about is critically important to the island's future. But I think we also need to reflect upon the fact that one of the other problems we have is we're struggling to retain on-island talent and therefore skills because of the cost of living and particularly the cost of housing. We're also struggling to hire new people into the island for the same two reasons. So whilst that happens in parallel, you'll have heard me talking about this on multiple occasions. We also need to solve the housing crisis so we retain talent and attract talent to the island.
Yeah, I mean, you've answered my next question, actually, which was going to be, and I know that you always allude to this point, but, you know, to what extent the full employment is stymieing, the development of, or rather the filling of posts which are essential to the island's economy.
It's all over the place. You'd have heard me mention my 3 amendments that have never come to fruition in the last Assembly. One of the important ones, I thought, was the Housing Action Plan. Now, that was seconded by our Chief Minister, and the whole point of that was to get on a page what we've got in terms of states property, what the GHA are doing, what have they done in this sort of land purchase process that the Policy and Resources and the previous version of the PNR have did, and can we have it straight on a page? And what does it mean for that field? What are we doing with the Cattle Hospital? What are we doing with King Edward VII? What are we doing with the vineries? Where's the fontaine? What's happening there? But for some reason, frustrated as we are, and I did it effectively on behalf of myself, but thinking that with the Chief Minister we might actually get that page, but on behalf of the committee as well, I was expecting a plan on a page which would tell us that field bought there isn't going to go into planning for 2 years' time. Well, at least we know. But that would then give the construction industry something that looks like a housing plan. But right now, the construction industry doesn't have a clue what is going on any single site, because that plan on the page, that housing action plan, which was the point of that amendment, was my attempt to try and make some sense of the multiple bits of area that are under state's control.
I take the point, but I don't want to spend too much of this hearing talking about housing, as it's not specifically your mandate, but I absolutely take the point. My final question in this area is, and it's perhaps too early to even ask it really, given what you've said, is that what tangible difference will the plan, when it's published, make to the local economy?
Okay, I think I can answer that only in as much as I think there's been a review previous. I was just speaking to Deputy Trott earlier. Has there not been a construction scrutiny review recently?
I'm not sure it's a scrutiny review, but it was certainly some time ago, wasn't it? It was, I think, possibly 8-10 years ago, maybe slightly longer.
Okay. Well, but building on this same idea, we've all agreed that we need 300 houses a year. The chance of us doing that isn't very high at the moment, and none of us actually know why. So part of that HAP, as I described, was at least to get it on the page, and that it was supposed to help government, and it might be, and it's far be it for me to suggest some further work, but scrutiny, but I'm about to. You probably need to start looking at what the state of the construction industry is at the moment, what its capacity is, what is fact, what is not fact, and what do we need to at least start, and probably pulling in some of the industry members. We're hearing it from the service sector. They need more staff. We're hearing it from GFSC, who's even put out a statement on the problems they've got in finding staff. We're hearing it across the hotel sector. We're hearing it building. Staff is entirely critical to developing this island, along with housing as well.
Thank you.
Returning to your March, did you want to add something, Deputy Councillor Miller?
Well, I think the President is absolutely right. So I think there's different parts of the equation. One is how many people do you have on the island? And we all know we basically need more people. We want more people. But I think what's very important is to recognize then, once we have those people, what is the structure of skills? Are they able to upskill? Are we able to be quick and nimble? Are we able to make sure people can learn over their lifetime? And then placing the focus, whether with government funding, whether through the types of skills pathways we can enable on the island, is to really also focus what are those some of those key strategic potentially areas, whether it's more digital skills, AI-enabled industries, creative industries. So the structure of skills and what kind of programs we put in place, and incentivizing people to really go on their journey, because that's, that's key to productivity on the island, to then economic, social well-being. So I think there's two elements of it: the number of people, but also the kind of skills that they can develop over their lifetime as the world also changes, and we have to be nimble in responding to all the different changes we will face.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry, Deputy.
No, it's fine, don't worry. I just want to go back to Deputy Fairclough's original question, which was, don't talk about housing, talk about the impact it's having on stymieing the economy. And I think there are two ways I'd look at this. One is, if you look at the number of open positions that are on the island, of which you've probably heard me say on numerous occasions, it's somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000. I always say 3,000 is probably a bit punchy, but just think about whatever that number might be. Every job that's not filled in a business, whatever that business is and whatever that sector is, puts additional pressure on the other people in the organisation, and it means potentially they can't do the expansion that they want to do. So that's one way in which it stymies the economy. The other way it stymies the economy is, again, think about how many people you estimate to not be, how many jobs you consider not to be filled at the moment. Every single job that we fill produces income tax. You do the numbers, 1,000 times median wage, 2,000 times the median wage, whatever number you want to do, that's another way it stymies the economy. And the third way, and there are probably more, but here's just three to keep it simple, is every job you fill, apart from paying income tax, social security and all those types of nice things, also contributes to the local economy, because those people are going out and they're shopping in our shops, they're eating in our local restaurants, and keeping the economy buzzing. So the quicker we can fill those roles, the better it will be for all of us.
I think on that point, which you have indeed raised on several occasions, and I think on the last occasion you raised it was in the States Assembly, and I seem to recall Deputy Trott's response was that the majority, and this is again something he raises on a frequent basis, that the majority of people do not pay enough in tax to cover the services that they use. So I can see where you're saying, how do you resolve that issue? Because I see where you're saying that all of those people pay tax, but then they also take services. So where is the balance?
Well, that I guess will come up for debate fairly shortly.
Part of the balance is, I think, for the island to develop a longer-term economic vision in terms of what are those sectors we really want to put a focus on. So we do have more high-value, high-productive jobs. And some tougher decisions could be taken. Well, actually, the lower value industry, while they're important, we cannot keep growing them forever or growing them above average growth rates. So I think that's a resolution that came out of the tax debate, and Deputy Mari is kind of hopefully will be working more actively on that resolution. So I think that's something quite important. But in addition to the issue of full employment, I think what we also need to talk about is the non-employment, because it's those people who are in the economy but have chosen not to be actively participating. And I think we've touched on that issue through a number of debates on population and others, but it's partly driven by non-employment relating to sickness and illness, which seems to be on increasing growth on the island, and I think that's a real issue. And the other one in relation to potentially caring and child caring responsibilities. And I think that's about 10% of people who could be working in aggregate. So I think those are the types of levers we've recognized within also the human capital as one of the levers the government overall has in terms of managing the supply of labour, supply of skills. And those, I believe, should be some of the priority areas probably for the next political term now, because they are not really within the government work plan right now, for the next political term to look into. So participation, looking at those participation issues potentially, and whether we can have any influence on them.
But if they're that important, is it something that the committee is minded to bring forward into this political term? Because, of course, using people who are already on the island, you've expressed the difficulty with housing. Using people who are already here doesn't put an additional strain on housing.
Well, we have various resolutions on looking at participation rates in relation to, I think, caring responsibilities, potentially childcare support. That's something we've also been touching base through the Reducing Cost of Public Service subcommittee with education, with employment, social security, potentially whether the reallocation of some of the benefits could be actually into family support. So I think work has begun, but I haven't seen government work plan funding being allocated because it's very early stages, basically.
I think you asked I think you were directing that to the committee, but again, it's not really the committee's job,
Yeah,
because I
it's
think there's a
possible.
direction elsewhere. But if I can add one thing without pursuing this too far, I'm going to make a mildly social comment. What I'm starting to see, and I think we've all seen, as we as economic development, we're there to drive our number one industry. In the first instance, quite clearly has to be the finance industry, and we're getting pushed and pushed to say, look, we need more housing, we need more staff. I can employ people, but I haven't got the jobs, and this has been said on a number of occasions. But in all of that, the only word of warning, and then of course, come on, Neil, all of the other services are telling us the same thing, and that's everything from your cleaners to tourism to professional services. Everyone wants more people. But I'm going to give a word of warning here, is that I'm starting to see it, but I think I saw it at the time. Guernsey folk are getting left behind in this constant drive for professionalisation and the gentrification of this island. The core Guernsey folk, who actually built up all of our pension funds, who built up what's left of our own, they are getting left behind. And we're talking about key workers, we're talking about the finance industry, we're talking about where is the message for the Guernsey folk. And this from purely as a Guernseyman whose family came here on the plague boat, or probably brought it, knowing our loss, along with gonorrhea, syphilis and every other disease in the island. What really concerns me, as we look at it at a policy level, I'm significantly concerned that the skilled people that we're talking train, they're leaving. In my family, I've seen 3 or 4 members are now in Canada. So there's this weird carousel that's going on. We're talking about skills, we're talking about housing. We're not even keeping the people that are actually skilled in the island. They're leaving the island. And that isn't featuring in this discourse in any way, shape or form. What's in it for the Guernseyman and woman?
Thank you.
Can I ask a follow-up to that? You raise an interesting point, fairly critical point. We are on a carousel. We've got it's not a target, but an assumption that the population is going to grow by 300 a year, although last year I think the figure was more like 600. And this probably can't go on forever. At what point and how do you get a grip on that and control the numbers whilst at the same time filling the jobs? It's a conundrum that's almost impossible. Have you had any thoughts on that?
Well, only in as much as that, we've been speaking to Guernsey Finance quite regularly, and the reason the extra funding is in there. So we have a job to, I believe, that may or may not be agreed in the government work plan, to refunding the single biggest industry that drives absolutely everything. And it is true. If we are successful in our marketing, and we are, because only an hour ago we were talking to one member who's who's got interest in the Guernsey Finance. He's talking about the amount of work that is being brought in from the work they're doing in South Africa. That's great. But it's not always new business that necessarily means new people. There's a bit of churn as well, because we do lose business every year. But we also have to bring in business. But what I don't know is when I have those quantifications, does that mean every piece of business means an extra 20 people? I don't know what that is. I don't know where this island can top out, and I don't think anyone can answer this question. But as long as we are wedded to, and we've got our carriages hitched to the finance industry, and it feeds every single one of us in this room, that's the horse we've hitched our wagon to. But I can't. It's more of a philosophical question, Deputy Dyke. I don't know where this tops out.
And it's not, to be fair, it's not just the finance industry. We have an ageing population, so we owe it to people that have worked hard all their lives to provide them with the care that they need as they get more elder. And as the number of those people grow, the number of healthcare workers that we need, as Deputy Broad has said on numerous occasions, needs to grow. And it's only right and proper that we bring those people in and care for our parents and our grandparents, etc.
Can I? Moving on. In your statement in March, Deputy Inda, you said This is how we as a government can really drive growth in our workforce by increased participation and by increasing the population, investing in our education and skills base to improve our productivity, and investment in our housing and construction sector, which covers a lot of the points you just made, most of which may not be delivered this term. But if the Assembly can look back and say that we, as the government of 2020 to 2025, left a plan for the next 2 or 3 governments, we will have done well. Do you not think the public might have been expecting that this extended term of nearly 5 years might have aspired to more action rather than just leaving a plan for the next 2 or 3 governments, which those governments might not even follow?
Under the scrutiny, is that a political question, or is that, are you asking what we could do under our mandate, or you're asking me to talk about what my view is of the...
Well, I'm just picking up on something you made in your statement on behalf of economic development to the Assembly in March.
Okay. But put it this way, when we started, and this is, I'm going back to housing again, and there has been a failing, we will all remember, there was a housing action group. 18 months it took to come out with a 20-page document that didn't have one piece of action on it at all. And back to where I was before, I wouldn't say livid, certainly disappointed. And in that 18-month period, we heard this Viney site had been bought, that piece of land had been bought, the X had been bought. So this was all going on. The whole reason of putting a housing action plan is because when I wrote that, I was hoping we were going to see that plan. And still, how long were we? 8 or 9 months on? And I think the actual amendment came from a previous, 6 months earlier. Still nothing. So to answer your question, part of our job is not our self-edification. It's not our job to see if we can edify ourselves to get into the next term. Part of our job is to at least leave some kind of legacy for the future government and for our people to look back and say they've done as best as they can in the time that they've got. But so to answer your question, if we don't get something that looks like a housing action plan, to answer your question, I think that will be a failure. And it's so easy to do. Put them all on a piece of paper, tell us how many are there, how much the plot prices were, why did you buy it, and when are you going to build on it? How difficult is that?
Deputy Councillor Miller.
I think I looked at the statement that was made, and that quote was taken out following the President's updates in relation to what we're doing in skills. And as we said, this is about to go out with an actual body that will be, hopefully delivering across. It was in relation to what was happening in finance and the ongoing investments that this committee with Policy and Resources has continued to advocate for Guernsey Finance. And so this is a number of items of what this committee specifically has been delivering. So I think, we're not just leaving something for someone else to do sometime in the future.
Thank you. Coming to the retail side of things, shortly after your election as President, you addressed the Chamber of Commerce, and in that speech said the committee is providing funding to enable the establishment of the Guernsey Retail Group to support a retail manager position and data and footfall monitoring. Was that funding provided, and if so, how much has been spent so far? It's
coming to the end. The actual figures were: year one was £110,000, £85,000 in year 2, year 3, and I believe it's ending in October, is another £85,000. So in total is £280,000. Well, we are under direction to deliver. I think it's around 2.4, 2.5%. I think we're under direction to make some savings. If we are going down this continued commissioning model, we're seeing similar with the TMB, and I understand we're going to get questions on it later. We're trying to push certain things out for the sector to do. I don't particularly believe, just because, and I'll couch this carefully. I don't particularly think because 5 members randomly selected from the population who happen to be on economic development, and I don't necessarily mean this committee members, can claim they are experts in X or experts in Y. My genuine belief and I mean that for tourism, and I'll answer your question about retail, it's better for retail to deliver to us what it wants. It's not acceptable, and I've heard this time and time again, is Guernsey, a politician gets up and always wants a strategy. Well, because you went shopping. The best people to deliver a strategy, which the Guernsey Retail Group have, is the Guernsey Retail Group. So to answer your question, will that continue? It won't continue at the same rate, and we have met, I believe, our targets as by resolution we were asked to. But within that, it might be we've kept aside an amount of money, asking the Guernsey Retail Group whether they want to carry on with a very good committee very good. I don't know what they call themselves. What are they? I suppose just retail group. I suppose they're just a retail group. So I was looking for a different word, but the clues in the name. Basically, to be perfectly frank with you, Deputy Burford, I don't mind mentioning the name, by effectively being led by Mr. Creasy, we are buying some serious talent that we would not have got necessarily from a model whereby we look at consultants. So I'm absolutely comfortable, and I'm hoping Mrs. LePage and Mr. Creasy come back to us and ask us to continue it, because that's what we would really like to do. Because I don't think politicians should claim they are X in this or Y in that. It is entirely down to the industry to deliver its action plans and its own strategies, is my view. Okay. I hope that's answered your question.
Do you know what the retail group are actually doing with the money? How they're investing it? What they're spending it on?
Yeah, we do. Part of it is funding a staffer, for want of a better word, who I mentioned earlier, and I won't mention it again. There's basically work in there's a little bit of event management going on. There's data collection, and they have published their strategy. But the next, I think I mentioned that voucher costs were in the order of sort of year one was 110, 85, because the whole point of that was to develop the Guernsey retail strategy. If we continue the funding, if they come and ask us for it, then of course it will be reduced quite substantially, because effectively it's a maintenance budget, because they developed they've already developed their Guernsey retail strategy. And in some good news, I'll answer a question that you haven't asked, is that we should be very happy the way the retail is going at the moment, because the occupancy levels are much higher than they are in the UK. There's something like I think in the UK, from the last time we had the retail group in front of us, they were telling us that there's 10% dereliction, for want of a better word, across the UK, where Guernsey's only 7%. St Sampson's heading in the right direction. A lot of churn, a lot of independence. We've recently seen the market finally find a long-term lease. Isn't it great news that someone is investing in retail to the tune of 10 to 15 million quid? It's all actually very good news. Sorry about that, guys, but retail's doing quite well.
We're here to have good and bad news. I think Deputy Gabriel's got a few questions on tourism before we go to a break.
Thank you. So, again, back in your March update, you spoke about the implementation of a new governance model to oversee the marketing and promotion of the Bailiwick of Guernsey as a destination, and the formation of a new tourism management board. Could you update us on how the new TMB is functioning? And as you alluded to earlier, it's a specialism, and that the specialists are doing their job. So from your perspective, could you update us, and also whether you've allayed any concerns of those who are in opposition to the structure?
Okay. The most difficult thing is extracting power from government. That is the most difficult thing to do. Deputy Xantha Miller has alluded to a skills management board, for want of a better word. Extracting that from government is going to be very difficult, because government likes keeping, in general, power. The most difficult thing I asked my committee to support was extracting tourism out of government. Now, the makeup of that tourism management board are sea carriers, travel agents, accommodation sector, providers of events, and on-island transportation. They are We are in the process of finishing off. I think we probably should have done this first, but we're in the process of setting up the SLA and the KPIs, and that's out with the committee to sign off. Similar to Deputy Vermeulen is a representative on that board, and he's been a hotelier for 43 years. So I'm relatively comfortable that it's heading in the right direction. We've had an update. I think it was about June, July. I'm probably going to get it slightly wrong when. The chair of the Tourism Management Board came in and gave us a presentation. A tourism strategy, I understand, will be developed possibly by the end of the year, if not in quarter one of next year. So that's all again heading. But to relay the fears, we have had a lot of noise. And we've also heard from one particular group, which we have to take incredibly seriously, because they're claiming they represent 85% of the industry. All I would say, and I've said time and time again, please engage with them. But I would also say, and I think I've got privilege here, don't I? Yeah, I understand I've got privilege here. Don't believe absolutely everything that you read, because equally the tone that has come into the committee, they wanted our heads on a plate. They're telling us it's all gone wrong. It's not entirely what I'm hearing from some of the members of the same organisation. I've had personal phone calls apologising for the tone emanating from the executive. And it's not just one, it's two or three. We also have members of who are not as part of that group who entirely disagree with the tone and the style they're trying to engage with us as a committee and us and the board as well. So I'm fairly comfortable that it was always going to be difficult, because not everyone gets their own way. It will be a difficult year. It may be a difficult second year, but it was entirely the right thing to do. We have to get the responsibility for the marketing of this island out of government, and we've done it, and it will be a success, and it is a success. Deputy Councillor, I think you had something to add.
I want to add to that, because actually I think it's been an interesting new model in terms of creating this hybrid model where the TMB with the board is set with really coming up with an industry-led strategy. However, for now, also the management of the marketing spend, which is a substantial part of marketing, is under the auspices of the central comms, which, since taking on board the marketing of the island, I think have truly transformed and have also been really great in localizing much more of that spend with local agencies, which I think has been a huge success. So I think one of the criticism has been that there is no full-time CEO of Visit Guernsey that's overlooking. But actually, we have a very professional team of excellent communication team under Mary Putra, who has done, I would say, a tremendous job in actually turning around the marketing side of things. So I think we're confident that there is the right resources looking at the largest proportion of the spend right now, and whether the model changes in the future is to be determined.
I may at some point, just for, everyone's got a view on creativity, I may at some point share what, in terms of creative output, was going to go out had we not transformed that model. I may do that, because we get a lot of unfair criticism that we are the wrong people doing the wrong thing, and we're getting the same from the Guernsey Airport Action Group as well. But we put ourselves in this position. We are not going to please anyone, but to answer your question about the TMB, I'm absolutely sure it is the right model today. We've got a super chair on that board. She's quite clearly gathered a significant broad spectrum of the industry, and I genuinely think it's going to head in the right direction. Just because other members may not have been on it, or they've had their noses out of joint because they didn't get the job, don't blame me. You didn't turn up. You didn't want to engage. What do you want from me?
Building on that then, the TMB is developing a tourism strategy. Could you tell us, please, when it's going to be published? And also, will that strategy represent the view of your committee or the members of the TMB? We'll have
nothing to do with it. Again, this is another fallacy that has been promoted. It sounds like Deputy Inders are in every week telling them into what colour the brochures are going to be. We've got nothing to do with it. Nothing whatsoever. Only in the fact that it's public money. We have appointed the chair, and we've allowed her and give her full independence along with the committee to come up with strategy, with the exception of Deputy Vermeulen, of course, who is a member of that board. So ultimately, there is nothing coming from me. That is being developed along with, I can't remember the chap's name. Keith Beecham, sorry, Mr. Keith Beecham is acting as a consultative capacity along with that board, and from memory, and I'm happy to get that confirmed. I understand January and February before the next term we will have a strategy published by the Tourism Management Board.
So to clarify then, you've only got one committee member who's part of that strategy, and that strategy is not coming back to the States.
No, it doesn't. No, never come back to the States. No.
Is it approved by the committee?
Yes.
Yes.
No, beg your pardon. No, it's not approved by the committee. Sorry, I beg your pardon. There's a bit of confusion here. We've heard before that tourism strategies come to the States. In my lifetime, and I've been hanging around tourism as an account director and an account manager, in my lifetime in memory, I don't remember a tourism strategy ever coming to the States. It's entirely an industry document run by the TMB, approved by the TMB, who will publish to their industry. It's as simple as that. The bit which we've got to concern ourselves with is there is a significant amount of public money being invested in that, and it's not small. It's let me get this right. Committee's budget £1.868 million per annum in the marketing and the visiting economy in 2023. I think we may have reduced it a little bit in some way, shape, or form to come in line with the resolution we're under, but it won't be coming to the States at all. It'll be produced by the industry for the industry.
Pick up on that, Deputy Ender, though, because you said that you're in the process. I think you said you're in the process of setting up the SLA for this group and also the KPIs. So who is setting those?
I understand its officers. From what I've seen, they're fairly standard fare. And I think I can ask. I'm going to bring in one of our officers. I just don't have it in front of us. I'm going to lean to our committee secretary, who may be able to answer that question.
Yeah, we're in the process of developing an SLA with the TMB. We've got a draft. Obviously, that will be shared with them. That will set out key KPIs, objectives. Both parties will need to sign that off and be comfortable with that. One of the key deliverables, obviously, will be the tourism strategy. But there's also other stuff in there about engagement with industry and so on and so forth. So we expect to sign that SLA off imminently, within the next month or so.
So that won't be done politically then. That will just be done at officer level.
No, the committee will see and need to be comfortable with the SLA, as will the Tourism Management Board. Both parties will have to agree to that.
It's about the money. In the main, it's about the management of the money, much like the Guernsey Retail Group. Management of significant funds. Of course, we're going to say, like we asked the Guernsey Retail Group, that we want to see a strategy. But we're not getting our colouring pens out. We're not writing the headlines. We're not telling them to put them on baked bean cans. We're not having any involvement at all. So I'd like to disabuse anyone of believing that they are not independent. They're entirely independent, with the exception of using public funds to run effectively. It's largely it's a marketing budget.
That's probably a good point. Unless you had something.
Just one follow-up question.
Yeah, sure.
In this process of settling the KPIs and the objectives and that sort of thing, is there a plan to try and bring the Guernsey Hospitality Association into that process? Because it seems a shame to do it if they're still outside of it.
Deputy Director, with the greatest respect, sir, with the greatest respect, don't believe everything that you read.
No, I don't.
Well, to explain the process, we set up, there was an utterly open call to put a chair together. Recruitment process for the chair. I'm going to guess of about 12 or 13 applicants. Yep. I think there was. It was myself, Deputy Fuller, and Deputy Vermeulen who shuffled through that process, and she who stood out with the most competencies was Mrs. Beacom. Now, Mrs. Beacom then went out to put her board together. and the board now exists as it is. Now, at any point, any member of the executive of the GHA could have put their name in the hat, and I can tell you now, if any board member of the GHA had beaten Ms. Speaker, I would have put them there. I've got no skin in this game. The fact that the main author of the letters, which I assume are agreed by the executive, has decided to disengage, it's not my job to make people engage with something that has been already gone through a process. That's up to them to engage. I can't bring people together who don't want, have declared they will have nothing to do with it. And it's also worth mentioning that we've actually got one member of the GHA who's actually on the TMB. So be careful what you read, be careful what you hear, because it might not be true.
Very good point to take a break. Thanks. Could everyone be back within 5 minutes, 20 to 4? Thank you. Okay, welcome back, everybody. So, Deputy Dyke, I think, is over to you on this.
Thank you. Given the current financial issues affecting the states, does economic development think that we should introduce measures to raise additional revenue from cruise ship passengers when they visit the islands? I think current thinking is perhaps that the current fees are quite low and could be increased.
You're probably in the same room as I was, Deputy Dyke, when not so many moons ago, January, February, there was a resolution, and as I've explained it in my statement, I think it was answered by Deputy Gabriel. We are under resolution to raise £2 million from the visitor economy. I explained this only last week, via something called a visitor levy. I also explained to Deputy Gabriel at the same time in an open forum, I thought everyone was listening, that we are going through a consultation process, and those letters have gone out, I would say Friday, or probably Friday, with the consultation responses coming back, and I believe it's the 21st of September. My vote didn't head in that direction, but two other members. But I take as I've said before, I take my responsibility seriously. If I'm under resolution from the States of Guernsey to do something, I will do it. And that's what we've done. And we've gone out to consultation, and those responses will be back by the 21st. And I can tell you now, they won't be influenced by me.
Can I just briefly add to that? So I think during the tax debates, the fair alternative proposals at some point included the option to vote for a specific resolution to vote for cruise ship, increasing the cruise ship levy. I believe that resolution didn't make it into the final set that was debated, and it's certainly not a resolution that was then approved. So while we are absolutely under resolution to look at a levy concept, it's potentially likely to be more a visitor levy based on, for example, staying visitors, so accommodation night visitors, rather than cruise ship levy. So I think probably looking at cruise ship is not fully within the scope, because there was a specific resolution previously that didn't make it into the tax debate.
Yes, thank you. So there are two separate concepts here. There's the cruise ship levy per capita per cruise ship as they come in, and the separate potential levy on hospitality on overnight stays at hotels, which would be paid for through the hospitality industry, which is a separate one. The Guernsey Hospitality Association have come out in favour of that if the levy could be applied towards extending the runway with an EMAS option. Have you considered that? Perhaps I'll ask Deputy Kazantzeva-Miller.
You'll ask me.
Okay.
Sorry, Deputy Burford. We are heading into debate now. Deputy Dyke is seconding an amendment where there's a clear explanatory note where they want us to come back in December to design a levy. I don't think it is appropriate for Deputy Dyke to be asking questions of which he's a signatory to an amendment, or using this position to potentially support his cause. But I will answer the question. But I must make it clear that I'm not comfortable with that question, because he knows it's in debate, he knows that policy letter's in play, and he also knows he's a signatory to that amendment, which alludes exactly to the question that he's asked. It's your decision, ma'am.
No, that's fair enough, Deputy Inder. I think that, Deputy Dykes asked the question, but I think I absolutely understand the point you're making, and I would be very happy to move on to the next question.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
You can ask another way.
I'll defer to the chair. Sitting on the planning committee this morning, we've approved another extension to the use of hotel rooms for to be moved from to be used for long-term residents, for people who need accommodation for temporary staff, etc. Do you have a view on how much that's affecting the hotel industry and our overnight stays? Is that, to your knowledge, problematic in terms of limiting the number of beds we can offer?
Okay, I'm going to talk broadly. In terms of actual beds that we've got roughly 5,500 beds in the sector at the moment. There's been a slight drop since 2019, but part of the reason for that is that we've lost some from the sector, and that's everything from smaller guest houses to some of the self-catering units. And I think there's 200 of those 5,500, which are kind of temporarily not being used for a number of reasons. And of course, there's 3% of that accommodation sector, which the committee, of which I didn't vote for, by the way, have decided that should be used for long stay key workers. I think it was. I think it was a letter written to us by Policy and Resources. That was made a committee decision to continue that. But I'll give fair warning. Given the value of property at the moment, given the pressures we've got on housing, I've personally got significant concerns where this could lead. If we continue this on and on and on, there is no argument at all that an extra 20,000 visitors are going to pay for a runway, which I know Deputy Dyke is very keen on. We can't ride two horses. I was going to say bum on two seats, but that'd be inappropriate. We can't ride two horses. We can't claim that we're pro the tourism economy when I know there are certain members of the tourism industry, given their age range, which are looking to basically finish their time in that, and they know that means basically selling off some of their properties and turn that into accommodation. So there are clear risks. To help you, Deputy Dyke, we have committed to an accommodation strategy. Currently, how it works at the moment, if I come out, I've got 4 self-catering units. If I pull the boarding permit from one of those units, I can basically stick it on the market for far too much money, and under, I believe, the planning laws, effectively in 2 years' time, I can prove that I've had it on the market. I can go to DPA, you can't resist it, and say, look, I've marketed it for 2 years, and effectively I'm not in self-catering anymore. Can I do something else? It doesn't mean I'll get accommodation for it, but can it be something else? That, given the value of property, the pressures, I've got significant concerns, but we are going through an accommodation review to find out what the state of the market is. There are quite clearly people that are investing in the industry. Look what is happening down at Admiral Park. Look what's happening down at Le Grand Mare. Look what's happening down at the Belarus recently in St. Peter's. So there are people still in. But there is a sector of this is hitting a certain age, and they are going to want to cash out at some point. The difficulty we have is there could potentially be a rout. There could potentially be a rout, because we saw that in the self-catering sector in, I think it was around 2007. This is not. We are not. What can I say? We are not a blank canvas like, early canaries. We're actually a mature market. And if you start looking around at the age group of some of the owner-operators of some of the guest houses, some of the hotels, some of the self-catering units, there is no succession plan. They could potentially, for some of them, become the pension plan.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Can we move on to Deputy Gabriel, please?
Sure. Another aspect of your wide mandate is, and you alluded to it briefly in your statement, is telecoms. So I'd like to ask you about the telecoms industry and the commitment from the states to Shaw with respect to the fibre rollout. So it appears from your statement last week that it's very much a good news story and the rollout's going well. What proportion of the total households who now have access to fibre have actually changed over to it?
I may, unless Deputy... Oh, is it there? Oh, sorry. I beg your pardon. Right. I don't know the percentages, but at the end of July 2023, just under 13,000 properties were fibre ready, with 5,601 connected using fibre broadband. You know, we all walk this earth, this island. We do things via policy, and we also do things just by talking to people. Now, I know a fair amount of people in the telecoms industry, and I will get this confirmed, I think, is the best thing to do. Well, I'll get a piece for you, Deputy Gabriel, is that they are quite surprised at the uptake. The uptake's been very good indeed and beyond their expectations, but I don't know what percentage of that expectations, and it'd be wrong of me to give you that information. But so if our committee secretary could take that note as something to do, but I'm happy to give our members a bit of an update. It might not be tomorrow or so, but we'll dig down a little bit in that. Unless Deputy Costanza-Miller, who sits on the working group, can add to it, or would you prefer to?
Yes, so there is the Broadband Implementation Group, which is composed of members of PNR, Economic Development, and I think I'm missing someone, and E&I and Procurement. So we do have a meeting coming up in next few months. Basically, it's a twice yearly meeting where we do get really detailed updates about what's going on. So perhaps we could circulate something, especially following that most recent update. But we're not far from approaching the half point of actual fibre, in homes, and then obviously the actual connection, the choice whether the households are going to switch over and connecting the legs behind that a little bit.
So well done, mate.
Does the broadband group or even ED as a whole have a percentage figure set in mind or a target figure of conversion?
It probably sits in the contract somewhere. It's best that we respond. I mean, we want everything to happen today, but that won't be in the contract. It's best if we peel off what the contract was and what the commitment was. We know it was over a 5-year period. We also know that there's going to be a certain expectation, I think, that the copper is just going to go. They will be pulling the copper out. So once the fibre in, the copper is going. So inevitably, I'm assuming it will have to be 100% at the end of the contract because the copper is coming out of the road. But I'd prefer to give you a little bit more detail on that.
I think it's worth to say the government has committed to universal provision. So what we are paying for is for that availability of universal access. We cannot force who connects to what, but as the President said, copper will be at some point switched off, so I think there will be a no choice scenario in a couple of years' time.
You mentioned the costs around the universal offering. Could you tell me some more about the release of the funds? My understanding is that the states have committed £12.5 million to the on top of the Shores contribution as well. How has that contribution been made? Or on what basis? Is it on premises past, and have any payments been made from the states of Guernsey?
As economic development, we were not involved in. I think the first thing I'm going to compliment all of you for making a very solid decision for ensuring that we are fibre ready for a modern world. So congratulations, everyone. I think I've said it before, and I'll say it again. Spend today.
On that. So I think there's very close monitoring happening by the procurement team about when the funds are released. The information we have is about 3.2 million of the funds have been released. So I think it's very closely monitored by procurement, and it's payment upon success, basically. Really, we don't release anything upfront.
But Deputy Gabriel, are you asking to be assured that we don't put some money up front and it never gets completed or something?
That's the thrust of the question.
I thought that was a thrust of the question. Again, I don't think that's likely to be the case, but again, that's something to be taken away, and we will give you a response.
But it is absolutely it's paid in arrears. Yeah, for work done.
Okay, that's reassuring. Thank you.
Okay.
And so moving on to from fibre rollout to the rollout of 5G by Shaw, do you think that's going to have an impact on the potential take-up of the fibre?
We're under direction to bring back a licensing framework, which we keep getting told it's the end of the year we should see something, but quite clearly we're in September. That's not going to happen. But I was in conversation yesterday with one of the telco suppliers. They do, as they roll out a future network which doesn't include Chinese tech. They want some assurance from us that 5G is likely to happen, because that's part of their planning. So we are under obligation. But I will turn to Mr. Wakeland behind me to remind us where we think that policy letter is going to appear in the States. Mr. Wakeland.
The licensing framework should be as a committee paper seen in Q4 of this year. That would then mean that would be part of a consultation to get it to that stage. Then there'd be a policy letter that would go to the States, and if it's subject to the States agreement in hopefully Q1 of next year, it would then be for the regulator to put in place the various licensing steps that the States agrees.
Okay, I've got no further questions on fibre or telecommunications, unless anyone else has got a supplementary.
Yeah, moving on to finance then, obviously, which is a key part of industry locally. In your recent update, you stated you were recommending a continued increase in the funding to Guernsey Finance. What are the KPIs, the key performance indicators currently in place and assessed by economic development to monitor the effectiveness of the money being spent by Guernsey Finance?
At this point, I've got a very good financial lead on my committee, and I'm going to turn to Deputy Moakes to answer those questions.
Thank you. It's a very good question, and I think the key here is actually results, because we put quite a lot of money in there, as you'll be aware, a lot of additional money in there. But what we're really interested in is the net sum. What's the result of that? And I'll try and find my paperwork in a second. But if you look at what they've been doing since that additional money went in, they've put a lot more effort into promoting Guernsey abroad, and that is effectively what their job is. Thank you. So they're not designed to promote the island locally, they're designed to promote it all around the world, and they've really stepped that up. They are doing far more with far many countries. They have more representatives representing our island around the world, and the results are beginning to come in. It's creating a pipeline of new business coming to the island. And what that means is that moving forwards, we should be seeing more businesses moving here, more people moving here, and more business moving here. And now I have my paperwork, which I'm pleased to say. So,
the question is, how do you measure that?
well, let me give you some examples then of how we have been measuring it. We've got one new trust company licence here. Absolutely new. We have new currency management banking license here, and we've got 2 new investment managers here already. There are also lots and lots of other discussions going on. So as I say, this is a continuing pipeline. If we look at the awards and accolades that we've won over the past 12 months or so, winner of Best IFC of the International Investment Awards, winner of European Domicile of the European Captured Review of the Year Awards, winner of the IFC of the Year of the City Wealth IFC Awards, and Guernsey rose 12 places in the latest Global Financial Centres Index. That's published by the City of London think tank ZYEN, and it actually put us above Jersey. And we also overtook Luxembourg in 2023 to become Europe's premier jurisdiction for captive insurance. So, you know, it's the results that count. Those are results for me. If you want any other KPIs, we can look at the increase in views of the videos, of what we've put out there to promote the island. So a 458% increase in views of our video output. I mean, I could go on and on and on explaining how successful they have been.
I think I can answer the actual question itself, and it's reminded me, and thank you for the officers. We haven't released KPIs because those KPIs determine what Guernsey as a jurisdiction is trying to do in certain markets. As soon as you publish that online, guess what your competitors are going to see? All of your KPIs. So we wouldn't publish that level of detail. For the initial KPIs, I can assure you that it was actually largely driven by Deputy Moakes, and I think Deputy Fowler as well, and myself. We saw the initial document, and we had to make some significant changes along with Guernsey Finance. This is when we first started. So that was the first role. But what we can tell you quite clearly that it has been working. But Deputy Fairclough, I suspect you have got probably like me, certainly coming out of the trade, is that, you know, the old adage in the business is, I know 50% of my marketing is working, I just don't know which 50%. So there is certainly an amount of spend you've got to spend for the sake of spending, but you can never entirely determine is that guy went to New Zealand. Well, I suppose you can actually. We're seeing more of that. To be fair, I'll take some of that back because we've actually got people physically out, not in New Zealand, in destinations who are targeting South Africa, for example. We are seeing definitive pieces of work which we didn't see before because it was all on, you know, I've had a phone call, and I think there's been a significant shift from what I saw Guernsey Finance was 2 years ago, and it was fairly, I'll choose my words carefully again, I wasn't that comfortable with some of the metrics that they were using. You know, they had 1,000 phone calls. Well, they didn't have 1,000 phone calls. They had 20 phone calls and 5 clicks on a website somewhere. That's not a metric. A metric to me, well, I suppose it is a metric, but I want to see physical business. But the extra investment that we've done in the first round, within a country mile, the thing has changed completely. The unit has changed. We're hearing real businesses are coming to Guernsey. There isn't a week, and generally it isn't a week, where someone isn't telling me personally that this piece of business is coming from Guernsey Finance. In fact, only today we've had some good news stories again in conversation with someone who's in the finance sector, that they're talking about the work that's happening in South Africa. And also part of this is not just about new work, it's about churn as well, because we will naturally lose pieces of business. It's not just about new business and expansion. It's keeping the business we've got, recognising where their opportunities are, working the markets, and spending money again on our most significant industry.
And I think Deputy Fairclough was there earlier in the year when Guernsey Finance did its regular annual update at St James's. And if you were there, I'm sure you were. You weren't. Okay, well, if you had have been there, you'd have seen for yourself when they presented what they've been doing for the past year, how incredible it was and what great results they were getting, and literally gave example after example after example of where the money that we've put in has helped them to project Guernsey further around the world.
Yeah, and I'm hoping that, you know, you're not sensing from my question that I'm doubting the value of that. I'm asking you as a committee how you measure it, and to that end, if it's approved under the government work plan, what will the additional taxpayers' money be spent on moving forwards in this regard?
There is a plan. And it's I can't remember if it's been published, but certainly the committee has seen elements. I just don't remember. I genuinely don't remember it's been published entirely, because of course, again, you don't tell the enemy which trench you're in. But it's as simple as that. But in terms of our personal monitoring, we do see the board every 6 months ago, and it's 6 months or so, and it's worth mentioning we do actually have Deputy Fuller, who's a board member of Guernsey Finance as well. So I've got complete confidence if he had identified any issues or problems, I'm fairly sure he'd tell us straight away.
And the other thing that's really important here is I want to clarify when we talk about additional funding, what we're talking about here is there was a core amount of money that Guernsey Finance got. We increased that for a period of time. Now that ends in 2025. What we want to ensure is that the current funding that they're getting, the enhanced amount, continues, because that's an election period. And we don't want to get into a position where nothing happens, the funding is cut. We want to agree it now so that continuity is there and they can continue to do the great work they have been doing, rather than having this question mark about what may happen moving forwards. Because I think, going back to what I was saying about pipelines, about planning, about getting things in the diary, many of the things that they do, for example, Sustainable Finance Week, which is happening next week, which I hope you're all going to, these take months, even a year to organise. So there's got to be certainty for Guernsey Finance. There has got to be, we know what's happening, we know what we're doing, we know when we're going to do it, or else it will take a huge amount of time to catch up on that, and we will lose potentially pipeline, etc., etc. It's not a good thing.
This committee gets it, and as Deputy Max has alluded to, it's you've got to give it some. You've got to give these boards a certain amount of continuity, that the election isn't going to go do anything stupid. It may do something stupid. But I'd be very surprised if a future economic development isn't fully behind the single provider of everything in the island at the moment. I know people don't want to hear it, but that is the reality. It drives and funds everything.
And if it helps you just to understand where this money goes to, communications globally, not just here, in fact not here at all particularly, it's globally, because that's the whole purpose, it's attracting business here. Strategy, huge amount of work goes into developing strategies through consultation, through just working with people. Business development, I talked about new people being out in the markets, going out to those markets. Events, I mentioned Sustainable Finance Week, that's just one. There are many, many events happening all around the world that they do, again, to sell Guernsey, to bring people here, and then, of course, you know, creative marketing, etc., through things like LinkedIn, as you would expect, because they're business-focused.
Can I just briefly mention that the committee is very keen that whatever states funding we put into this increasingly devolved governance models, whether it's Guernsey Finance, it could be Digital Greenhouse, Skills Body, whatever, we are always very keen that there is a multiplier effect, and we are keen for that multiplier effect to really grow, whether it in terms of industry contributions, sponsorship, partnership, benefit in kind, volunteering models, whatever. So we're very keen, and I think we're one of the committees that is really one of the key areas on our agenda when we are coming with such models of delivery of services. And I think it's important to say that with this enhanced funding, and because Guernsey Finance is so well respected and really professionally run, the intention is that they will also draw a bit further funding from industry through the industry levy, participation and others. So this enhanced funding from government, continued enhanced funding, we are hoping will also unlock more funding from industry as well.
That's something makes a very good point there, because you've got the licensing embedded funding, but there's almost like a voluntary funding as well, and there's certain areas of the law practices that do very well out of the general activity and work, because you put something in Guernsey, there's always going to be a lawyer involved in some way, shape or form. But I understand that there are portions that don't contribute in any way, and I think that needs to be resolved. And I think that they're going through the Guernsey Finance are going through a process at the moment, overlooking that and finding a way of resolving that.
And two very, very important things I just want to mention, not for you, because I know you get it, but just for anybody that happens to be listening, just in case it helps, is if you look at our finance sector, it brings in 1.265 billion of GVA every year. If you add in professional services, this is 2020 numbers, by the way, it's an additional 333 million. That's circa, well, it's huge. So it's effectively 50% of the island's GVA, just finance and professional services. It's massively important to us. I can't overestimate how important this business is to our island, and how important it is that we continue to sell ourselves all around the world. And if you look at the number of people employed on the island, 5,960, again using 2022 numbers, in finance alone. If you add in professional services, an additional 3,000 people. It's massive. And every single business on the island relies to a lesser or greater degree on the people that work in these sectors, the shops, as I mentioned earlier on, the restaurants. If those jobs weren't there, who's going to be buying in the shops and restaurants? So it's critically important. And the final thing, if I can just say, sorry, I'm passionate about this, as you know, is that our competitors are out there every single day selling themselves. We've got to be out there shouting and competing with these competitor jurisdictions. It's critical that we do so.
Thank you for your very comprehensive answer. I'm just aware of the time and that we've got other ground to cover. So that's all the questions I have on that. Thank you.
Actually, could you move on to number 28, please, Deputy Fairclough?
A complete change of industry now. Deputy Inder, in 2021, when considering the emerging local medicinal cannabis industry, you were reported as stating, these are the early steps of a promising new sector for the bailiwick, one which is already attracting interest and investment locally and from overseas. Guernsey is now well placed to remain at the forefront of the cannabis industry, and we will continue to support its development. Not so long ago, medicinal cannabis was being held as a possibly significant economic diversifier for the island. What, in your opinion or your committee's opinion, has gone wrong?
I don't think anything's gone wrong because it's worth stating here that we are not responsible for a strategy. We don't create strategies. Where business comes to us and asks us to do certain things, and business came to our committee early on and said, look, there's a bit of a choke on the cultivation licences, and this is primarily around CBD, and they asked us to unblock it. It was unblocked, and I do remember having a conversation with one of our officers that said, probably a bit of an F and a blind in there, if I can't do it, who the hell else can? So there was clearly a problem with the unblocking of the initial cultivation licences wrapped around CBD. Job done. The law was in place. We were asked to get the cultivation licence out, and it took too long, to be perfectly frank with you. It did take too long. The industry then came to us and said we need an MOU. So again, via committee support, and particularly Home and HSC, we went through a process of very quickly in government terms, of getting the MOU. And the MOU itself is just entirely, it's a replication of the Isle of Man and the Jerseys. It's changed the name, do the same, and just we released the MOU later. So that's the job of government. Industry came to us and said, we need a law in place. That law was done back in 2000. Us as this new committee and said, please find a way of unblocking the cultivation licences. We did that. They then came to us and said, can we have an MOU? And we brought the MOU. It is not the job of government to start opening the doors, planting the products, and giving any assistance beyond that. The industry, led by the, I'm going to call them the Cannabis Association, I think they're called, Channel Island Cannabis Association, came to our committee and demanded some policy changes. That's exactly what we did. So that is as far as we've gone. What I'm hearing is Jersey is ahead of Guernsey in some way, shape or form. The real problem that Guernsey has got is that it hasn't managed to generate the finance for these nascent licences, and that, Deputy Fairclough, you will understand, isn't our job. You came to us in his industry and said we needed this, we gave it to you. You came to us in industry and said you wanted something else, we gave that to you. It's not our job to raise the funding. We were told as soon as the cultivation licences came through MOU, they were through the line, and we've done exactly what we were asked to do. The rest of it is entirely up to them.
So the cannabis licensing page on the gov.gg website states that the MOU that you've alluded to with the UK Home Office marked a significant step in the development of the bailiwick's emerging industry, cannabis industry, which has quickly become one of the most established in the British Isles. Do you think that remains an accurate description of the industry?
In terms of the, I believe we've got more licences than other jurisdictions, I believe, than Jersey. I believe we've got more licences. What hasn't happened is the raising of the capital for the funding of the various business plans. So at that point in time, that is what I believed. The fact that some of these operations have not raised their capital, there's very little I can do, where other jurisdictions have, by the way.
So does economic development continue to believe this industry can contribute meaningfully to the future revenue of the island?
I'd like it to. That's all I can answer. But again, without that capital being raised, please excuse me. At the moment, it's not generating an awful lot of revenue for the island. Of course, we would like it to. I'm trying to answer the question, Deputy Fairclough, and I'm not trying to avoid it, but I'm not financing it myself.
So do you consider there's a risk of reputational damage to the island from the medicinal cannabis industry?
Not particularly, because if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. If it does happen, it'll be very, very well regulated. So no, there is not from a medicinal cannabis point of view, that if it's not being grown, there's no risk to be had. We as government have done exactly what we were asked to do.
That's all the questions I've got on that. Thank you.
Deputy Dyer, I think you have some more questions.
Yes. You've mentioned the problem that we have with banking services on the island. There seem to be three issues: obtaining credit cards and by our local population, closing of pooled bank accounts by some of the existing banks, and the one that's been particularly drawn to my attention, the actually opening of new bank accounts by new businesses. All of this is seriously worrying. I mean, Deputy Mokes has explained all the good work that you guys are doing, which can all be undone by this. How optimistic? Well, firstly, is it all the banks that are causing this problem, or is it just some of them? Were you asking? Okay, can I finish the question? Is it all the banks or just some of them? How optimistic, I'm just conscious we're running out of time, so I'll run it together. How optimistic are you that we can fix this problem? And how much do you think it's to do with the way we enforce our anti-money laundering regulations? Is that becoming so difficult that people are beginning to give up and just say no? So that was the scope of the question.
As I said before, Deputy Mokes is our financial lead. I'll allow him to give. It might be the case that later on, Deputy Gazansova Miller may mention something in regards of digital credit cards and the like. So there'll be two people responding, and you'll be lucky it's not me.
Thank you. So yeah, we recognise there's some problems. Absolutely. Let me clear one of them first, because we can break these into slightly different sections. So the pooled bank accounts issue that's been raised, it's one bank. That bank has given notice to those customers who have been given time to move those pooled accounts to another bank, and there are other banks that operate pooled accounts. Okay, so hopefully that one can be resolved. The bigger group of issues that have been raised around retail banking includes things, exactly as you said, opening bank accounts, access to credit cards, access to business accounts, etc., etc. So we've realised it's not just a Guernsey issue, it's a Crown dependency issue. So the first thing we've been doing is talking to the other Crown dependencies to understand, is it exactly the same issues that they face, or are they slightly different? And from what I can see, they're incredibly similar. So the next step has been, we've been talking to the individual banks themselves on island and with the Banking Association to understand, this is what we've been told, what's your view on it? So we've had anecdotal feedback from them to explain. So the next stage of our work is to actually undertake a review where we take all of this evidence that's come in, go out for further evidence, and then look for solutions to the problems that have been raised. And what we're hopeful is that we can come back by the end of the year, I believe it is, with a paper which actually says, look, problem one is this, solutions are these, how do we make that happen, can we make it happen, etc., etc. I think, one thing I have to say is, remember, we're an island of 60,000 people. We're the size of Maidenhead in the UK. So to expect us to have thousands and thousands of choices probably isn't relevant. It's not going to happen, but we do need to ensure, which is your question, that we have the best possible service that we can offer. So for example, there is a bank on the island, a local bank on the island, which will be issuing credit cards very, very shortly, which hasn't done previously. But nevertheless, the review will still take place, and we will look to try and find solutions to all of these problems. So one, for example, that has been raised has been the difficulty to access credit reference information. So if you can't do that, you know nothing about the person. You can't say, well, this person's good, bad, or indifferent. So we need to find a way in which we can enable credit references to pull the data that they need to help the banks make a decision about who they work with or not, as the case may be. But I don't want to go into solutions at this point. I think it would be premature to do so. I think the right and proper thing is to allow, if you will, the review to take place, and for us to come back with those possible solutions and see what we have to say.
We'll see it in November, but also, as I said in my response to the statement, I moved to Deputy Gazansova Miller in a moment, that I think some of these banks have got a responsibility beyond just money in, money out. There is, and I mean, you're hearing it from the UK. There's a little bit of pressure on what they call social responsibility. If you're going to manage your wealth here, then can you please at least try and provide a better service for local company, for residents? I think that's reasonable.
And to be fair, in all the banks that we've spoken to, they all want to work with us. That's a very important point to also make.
Deputy Councillor Miller would like to
just
contribute.
three points to add. I think we live it's a dynamic situation. So actually, the best thing often about the market is that market response. So we know that already, and Deputy Moggs mentioned, local players are looking to launch new products where they see there's an opportunity. That's happening. We're also having 2 new entrants as payment platforms coming in, focusing specifically on business sector. So we're already seeing that the market is naturally responding to what is happening. In terms of governments, we cannot solve it all, but we can try to encourage new entrants. I think that's one of the key. The more competition there is, the more chance that local players will start also responding. So I think trying to get new players into the market is really important. And the other one is trying to get local players to also hopefully become more innovative, keep launching and working with third-party providers as well. And on that point, I'm personally quite keen on open banking, which has been one of the key initiatives in the UK, which was set through PSD2 regulation a few years back, which has really transformed the financial services ecosystem in the UK. So those are the kind of policy levers we should be potentially looking, which will then stimulate the fintech kind of ecosystem on the island and beyond.
The question not answered was whether AML regulation had an impact. So I wonder if Deputy Moggs would answer that specific point. And I'd also like to mention 2 other areas, because we've spoken generally about the banking review, but I'd like to just remind people about the well, in fact, I'll do it now before I finish with Deputy Moggs. There were 2 other areas that we're looking at as well. The electoral roll. Basically having an open electoral roll that will allow people to be effectively validated, making sure Neil Inder exists when he applies for a bank account, and the other one would be somewhere within the registry itself. So if Neil Inder's ice cream services are legitimate, it won't be acceptable. We just are not in the world where these banks and retail services. It won't be acceptable for me to have to go up to the Gref, get a share transfer form, get my birth date and send it to a number and hope I'm ever going to get a bank account. We've got to move into the digital age, and effectively the way things are going is ultimately these providers of services, they don't want to post to you, they want to ping you. That's what they want to do. So, and you might want to ask the AML question, which came directly from
Absolutely. I don't think AML is a particular issue here at all. I mean, most of the banks have got a head office somewhere, and they apply the same rules to every jurisdiction they're in. So we're not treated any differently, as far as I'm aware, to any other jurisdiction. So I think it's perhaps some of the other things I was referencing earlier on rather than something like that. But, it's something that we could look into as well if you'd like us to.
All right, well, thank you for a very helpful answer. Thank you.
I've just got 2 very short questions. I think I can one get in before we wrap up. We've got a machinery of government review coming along, apparently, at some stage. I'm not quite sure when. What do you think? You spent 3 years on the Committee for Economic Development now. What do you think? Are there any changes that could be made where your committee specifically is concerned? I'm not talking about the wider thing, and assuming it exists in the similar format in the future, to improve the effectiveness of your committee.
Sounds like a trick question to me. If you think for a minute, I'm going to speak on behalf of my 2 committee members and tell you what they think. You've got another thing coming. I'm going to go to Deputy Moggs first, and then Deputy Councillor Miller.
Gosh, what could we... I mean, coming from a commercial background, one of the things that's always frustrates me is speed. Pace. Making a decision and that decision coming to fruition always seems to take longer than I think it should do. Having said that, sometimes you see all the work that's necessary to go into legislation, for example, and it is far more complicated than perhaps you first give it credit for. But that would be one thing, is pace, so that more of the things we agree to do actually happen more quickly than they do happen.
Okay. Deputy Councillor Miller.
From a committee perspective, we haven't had any discussion in terms of the implications of this work stream on our committee. I think it's probably fair to say that just look at the UK. I mean, you probably have now at least 3 ministries covering, what we are or should be maybe covering, and certainly not. You have digital, culture, media, science, technology, etc., etc., etc. I would say we probably don't have actually a lot of the levers that we probably should have more of. So I would say I think there's scope for improvement.
That's very interesting. I think we're at 4:30. I think we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you to all the witnesses for attending, not just so that we can ask you questions, but so that we can really improve the public understanding and awareness of what you as a committee do. Thank you to the members of the media for attending and those members of the community tuned into the live stream. We undertake regular public hearings with all the principal committees, but we've also got our next hearings are in fact in early October on our review of island-wide voting, and we'll be publishing details on those very shortly. So the hearing is now closed. Thank you, everyone.